All right then, gamers. So Janthir Wilds has been out for nearly a week at this point, and as you can probably hear by my voice, I've been streaming and playing a whole lot, and I wanted to talk a little bit about my first impressions and some initial thoughts on the expansion. I am going to be doing a full, detailed, comprehensive review as well, so stay tuned for that. But anyway, let's go ahead and get on into this. So let's start with the maps, I think. So Janthir Wilds has dropped with two brand new maps, the Lowland Shore and Janthir Sintry. And I think the maps are actually pretty much the tone setter for the expansion. And I would definitely describe Janthir Wilds as essentially a better version of Path of Fire in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to the open world standpoint, like the map content standpoint here as well. Of course, it is smaller in size, but again, we are on that faster release cadence. So I think the comparison actually is fair. One thing that I think I would say about these maps is the event density is really, really good, especially on the first map as well. There is so much going on, right? One of the big complaints I had with Secrets of the Obscure was the fact that, oh, like, man, these events are just not spawning. Like, what's going on? I have to wait for a long time. They definitely took the feedback on that, and everything is just going on constantly. There's loads of things to do, loads of things to explore, lots of little side stories going on there. The maps look fantastic as well. That's not really a crazy surprise, let's be honest here, when it comes to Guild Wars 2 open world map design. But yeah, these ones are really definitely a step up from what we were expecting. This is a much more refined version of this new expansion model that we're now dealing with compared to Secrets of the Obscure. The detail is there. The voice acting is really good. All the NPCs are interesting. There's a lot of stuff going on, loads of events to complete, loads of things to collect, loads of things to explore, and some pretty interesting encounters as well. You know, you have these world bosses that are going on there. As well, in the first map, we actually have the Bog Queen, and of course, in the second map, we have the Titan events. I will say that the second map could probably use with a couple more events, actually. The first map is much better in this regard. It's really, really strong with how much is going on there. I actually kind of hope that they will go back and add a little bit more to the second map, actually, because we kind of have to talk about hearts here a little bit as well, actually. The key kind of replayability for these maps is not meta events, right? We didn't do meta events this time around. So the key replayability is actually hearts, if you can believe that. And the way that these hearts are wired up is that they really want you to complete events. You don't get a lot of progress for getting kills or like pressing F on stuff as you might normally do. The progress is all about completing all of the dynamic events. And I think this is a really good idea, by the way. Actually, I kind of hope they continue with this style of content design going forwards into future expansions, because the game does have this problem with a lot of the kind of exploration content not really having a lot of value to the player after a first playthrough. This is why I kind of really draw a lot of parallels to Path of Fire here in particular, because Path of Fire was super good on the first playthrough, right? Like just exploring around, finding the secrets, you know, finding the griffin, right? Doing all the little side event chains, right, that go off and do things. But after that, after you'd played through it once, there essentially was nothing else, right? Like that's it. You know, you finished the expansion and you went back to Heart of Thorns. And I do think there is a little bit of that going on here with Janthir Wilds. I'll be talking about that later, though. To be honest. But yeah, they've done this is a really good idea when it comes to hearts. I think this is a good implementation of this system, I have to say, which I definitely saw this one coming. Actually, I thought, oh yeah, they can kind of make this good. They can make the rewards good. And of course, it's very linked in with the player housing, the homestead system. Getting a lot of loot there. It's coming from these heart systems. It's basically like a reputation system, right? You have to keep grinding out these hearts every day, and you get more rewards, and the more you do it, the more rewards you get there as well. But that was just like a good integration system to kind of keep the dynamic events relevant, which very often, and quite tragically, right, because they are solid content, they tend to kind of fade off into obscurity a lot in these open world maps there as well. Another thing that I do really like about the open world maps is they have dropped with adventures too. You know, that's something that they added to Secrets of the Obscure maps later on down the line. But because the adventures are here on launch with Janthir Wilds, it really does feel like much more of a complete package on launch, you know, rather than this kind of piecemeal thing. when it comes to the open world maps. The events are also pretty good. Not all the adventures are amazing. There's one where you like fly around as a bird. I'd say the big highlight for me is the salmon run events where you turn into a fish and you have to flop along either downstream or upstream. Really, really funny. A little bit challenging too, right? Like I think a lot of people have been kind of raging out at this adventure. Definitely worth a try though. And all of this kind of stuff like adds a little bit more variety to the open world, right? Like adds a couple of more things to do. Like all that kind of good stuff. So I think that these open world maps, we'll kind of compress this down into an opinion, I suppose. But I do think that from a design standpoint, from an aliveness, like the aliveness of the maps, these are probably some of the best maps they've ever done. In particular, Lowland Shore is probably one of the best maps in the game from that perspective. Janthir Sintry is also pretty good as well. I think not quite as good, though, as well. It does have the world boss on that, and I guess we can talk about the world bosses here a little bit, because this is a slight concern that I do have, and this is a little bit difficult to talk about, actually, because the expansion is really interesting with how they've decided to release content. So a lot of the kind of combat-oriented content is not releasing on launch. Like, I'm a player, I'm here for combat experiences, I like exploring, I want to go and do that, but when it comes to replaying the game, I want something that's got a little bit of bite to it. I want something that's going to fight back a bit, and that definitely is where these maps are lacking. It is purely kind of solo-oriented, exploration-oriented, and for me, it's not super replayable, to be honest, because I don't really care about player housing, to be honest. It's not something that I'm really interested in, and, I want content that's going to give me a bit of a challenge. It's kind of going to engage me and, kind of promote organization, kind of community effort. That's the type of stuff that I really enjoy, and that stuff isn't coming until much later. That's going to be the raid, the convergence challenge mode, right? Like the fractal, all of that is not here yet, and that's why I'm kind of umming and ahhing about how to judge this, because these maps are not trying to be that, right? And it almost feels a little bit unfair for me to kind of judge it by that standard to an extent. I can definitely point out that I wish the world boss was more coordination oriented. The world boss on the two Titans on Janthir Sintry, they are essentially just output checks. It's like a mild DPS check and a bit of a healing check, bit of a survival check. There's not really any relevant coordination. Like, you have to kill them at the same time, but that's like, I mean, come on, that's trivial. At the end of the day, there's no mechanic that you have to, like, you have to split into two groups, right? Like, you have to move here, move there, right? Like, there's no mechanic like the tail, for example, on Su-1, or something like Dragon Stand, right? Where you've got to fly up and get the bombs, right? And split into different islands, right? That's really not a thing on these fights. It is just basically stand and hit. I will say that I do actually praise the fact that they made the bosses kind of a little bit trickier to survive on, particularly Greer the Blightbringer. Actually, that one's really fun. There is definitely a little bit more to that one. Like, Decimate is very, very easy in my opinion. Not a lot going on. But Greer is cool, and you do have to kind of have some good positioning and movement to maximize your damage uptime, and that is nice. But yeah, I admit that I was a little bit worried about this when I saw some of the early access footage. And when I saw the mechanics, I was like, oh yeah, this is just a stand and hit boss, isn't it? And I'm not gonna lie, that is kind of what it is. And even though the bosses, I would say, are actually well designed, I think that all of the abilities that the bosses have, they make sense, they're cool. There's definitely like reward for engaging with them well. It's very individual, right? Like, it's kind of like, it's not a group oriented experience, right? Like, it doesn't really have that mechanical depth and coordination depth, and I think that is a little bit lacking, and this kind of funnels into the fact that, yeah, I don't find these maps to be super replayable for me. At the end of the day, I'm now done. I've done all the masteries, I've got all the relics unlocked, right? I've done all the collections, right? Like, I've played through everything. Like, for me, I'm kind of done. I'm obviously going to be farming the hearts to see what's at the end, but, I'm kind of doing that for the content, honestly. I'm kind of having that adventure with the stream. It's not really something that I'm particularly interested in from a gameplay perspective on my end. So that is a concern I have. But again, I actually do want to really underline the fact that these maps are supposed to be, this is intentional, they are supposed to be a bit more chill. We're taking it down a notch, right? That's not my cup of tea, but that's just the way it is. And again, there is going to be that content later on. And in fact, I think that this is a really interesting trade-off that's going on here. ArenaNet have even specifically stated that they want the convergences to be harder than they were in Soto, and it seems that they do want to kind of really almost push harder on the strengths of each individual area of content, right? So I think they've tried to almost hybridize this in SOTON, like making the open world events like a little bit harder, a little bit trickier. But the problem is that creates this friction point, right? And I think that's something that ArenaNet don't want. I think they want to make the open world very, very easy, very, very solo oriented, very, very explore oriented, right? And they're probably going to try and push the instance content to be a little bit trickier and to provide that combat experience. That combat experience is going to end up mostly in instances as opposed to the open world. And I will admit, by the way, that if it does go that way, I'll be a little bit disappointed. Like, there is something a little bit magical to me about kind of showing up on an open world map and you've got to overcome this challenge with like random people. It's like very different to me to actually like go into a map and you have to, you're just meeting up with like random people you've never met before. You've got to go. That is very different to I'm going to make a group and we're going to complete a convergence, right? Like it's like a very, very different avenue. Like you're going to get a very different selection of players, funneling into that system compared to just like the way the open world works. But it's honestly a sacrifice that I'm willing to make, right? We've seen what happens when ArenaNet try to do this kind of like, like halfway house on a lot of this content. It doesn't really work out super well, does it? Right? At the end of the day. So I'm interested to see how that's going to turn out, for sure. But yeah, definitely looking forward to the follow-up patches as well, because yeah, for all intents and purposes, I am now done with Janthir Wilds. And that's not to say I didn't enjoy it, by the way. I actually really did. The actual exploration for me, it is something that I do like in an MMO. I really enjoyed figuring out all the events, and I actually, because they weren't so stingy with mastery points and event respawns, I actually found the max mastery grind, and because you have to do the same thing as SOTA, right? You got to find all the events, you get mastery points for that, and you can farm the XP while you're doing that. Because it wasn't quite as annoying, and the respawn on events was way better, even though there were a couple of bugs that slowed me down a little bit. Yeah, it was actually a really fun, enjoyable experience, like to track things down and find where everything is. We had people on the lookout, right? I was working with some of my friends and it was like, oh, the Aboga spawn, come and get it. Or like we all pour in there as well, like, oh yeah, this event stuff, go. It was a really fun experience, actually. Kind of being a part of that, like going on an adventure with the gang there as well. And actually, this is a really good point to move into. It actually is the collections. The collections are really, really fun in this expansion. They have their own little space in the achievement panel now, the side stories. And yeah, I would almost say that I like these more than the main story, actually, because they are funny. They are interesting, right? There's one where you speak to animals and you have to recruit a bunch of animals for a daring heist, right? Yeah. And just the characters and the writing is really entertaining. And there's a whole bunch of them as well. It's a good meaty bit of content. There's some fun puzzles in there that you've got to figure out. Like, where do I have to go for this? Like, how do I make this work? All that kind of fantastic stuff. There's some cool stuff in there. There absolutely is. And definitely an enjoyable experience to play that through, because, we were there, on the cutting edge, like figuring this stuff out, trying to work together as a team to find all these different things about the map. It was actually a really good time. I will say one thing on the collections is, they could really use just a little bit more, right? And I want to use the heist example as the heist collection is the example of this. You basically go on this crazy adventure all over the world. You meet like a frog who's like intimidating you and saying like, you're a complete noob. You got to get out there and get these recruits, right? And there's all this build up and this really funny writing. And, it ends with, a cat basically giving you a speech, telling you the plan on how you're going to rob Evan Nashblade, basically, and all this absolute insanity. It's the kind of stuff I absolutely love. But here's the thing. You don't do the heist, right? There isn't that gameplay element, right? Like, and this, I hate to bang on about it, but this is kind of where some of this stuff does start to fall apart a little bit. Like, this would be some of the best content in the game if there was a little scripted sequence where you actually had to pull off the heist, right? And you just, you have a little instance and you go and do the actual heist, so like a full-on quest, and you do it and you get out, and then you have that payoff. And as it is, it was fun. It's cool, and it's actually, because of how memorable it is, it's probably a mini that I actually care about. I admit that. Well done to ArenaNet. Like, I will be using Mr. Ribbington, right, as my mini for the foreseeable future. I think having the little frog with the top hat, it's fantastic. It really is. but I wish it had that actual gameplay element, like making the story real would have been unbelievably fantastic. I think it really, really would. In the same way that the quest for the spear was in the Wizard's Vault, because of course the Wizard's Vault has this kind of quest thing, this new type of Wizard's Vault reward where you have to go on a little quest to get this spear, right? And the spear is like a cool cosmetic reward. Like stuff like that was really cool. You have to basically go on a quest to make some gloves to pull the spear out of a meteor, right? And then boom, there you go. You got to find the meteor, you got to pull the spear out. Yeah, that stuff is really, really cool because it has that extra active component that I think really enhances the experience and takes it to the next level. In my opinion, it's really, really cool in that regard. And I would love to see that applied to some of these collections at the same time. But yeah, I think I've kind of rambled on about that enough here, actually. I guess we can kind of go on to talk about some other things. I guess we can talk about spears next, because, of course, this is the big combat feature. We have got these brand new weapons, two-handed spears on land for everyone. And you know what? Yeah, they're actually really, really good. They iterated on them from the beta very, very well. They're very high impact in basically every game mode. I am going to have to laugh about this, but the only one that is maybe a little bit iffy is actually Ellie right now. And I can kind of explain why that. It's because this is such a meme, but I really think it is because Ellie just has a lot of skills. Like they had to do 5 skills for every profession, but with Ellie, they had to do 20, even more than that because of the Weaver abilities. And that is just a really, really big challenge compared to what they had to do for the other professions. So that might be something that ArenaNet need to think about in the future with their development strategy, how they're going to handle developing new stuff for Elementalists, because it's okay. It's like, it's not bad, right? It performs definitely okay. But I think some of the design there, it's just not quite as cohesive as some of the other Elementalist spears. But in general, yeah, I've messed around with quite a lot of them now. They're all really fun to use. I think they feel really good. And there actually is something that I want to point out about the spears too, actually, is that they kind of have a really intuitive design about them. Like the way those mechanics interlink, it's like, oh yeah, use that skill, then you get a bonus on this one. This one resets the other one, right? Like having that kind of intuition built into it, I think is really good for new players, like helping new players kind of understand how to use this weapon, all that kind of stuff is really, really good. Like the idea that you can kind of get a feel for what the rotation should be without necessarily kind of like crunching the numbers or looking at a guide, I think is a really important part of the game that's very, very lacking, actually. I love to see this type of design in the game. Overall, obviously some of them are incredibly busted. Revenant Spear is like 50k DPS right now, pretty good overall, but I think basically everyone's got some value, and obviously they'll tune it, they'll buff some, they'll nerf others, right? Like that's just the way it is, right? Like we can have our fun for now. You can enjoy your 46k DPS quickness herald while it lasts. Go and clear some of those challenge modes, like while you've got some ridiculously overpowered builds. Always fun there as well. But overall, I'd say the spears are a really big success, actually. They're so much better than the Soto weapons. It's not even funny. And that's kind of like the running theme of Janthir Wilds, really. It's just a much better version of what Secrets of the Obscure actually is and what that kind of delivers to the table as well. So yeah, big fan of those spears, actually. I definitely recommend giving them a try. And one thing I do want to touch on, actually, is this is kind of unrelated, but I do want to keep bringing this up because I think it's important. I really think ArenaNet should be giving one set of elite specializations away. When even if you don't have, say, Heart of Thorns, Path of Fire, and End of Dragons. The reason for that is because, let's be honest here, if you can't play elite specializations, it's a little bit rough. They are better, and a lot of the time they are more fun as well. And I think this is something that ArenaNet need to address. Like the fact that if you're a new player, you're maybe trying out the game, you're buying the latest expansion, you're leaping in, and that makes sense, right? Because again, the story is becoming more standalone. So, that's a pretty logical starting point, right? For a new player to just get in there. It is going to feel very, very weird when the metagame is oriented around elite specializations. Content is tuned around elite specializations. That is weird, if you ask me, to be honest. And I think that does need to be addressed at some point. But overall, I definitely say the spears are a great success so far. And like I said, everyone gets some value out of this, so get in there and try it out. Okay, so let's see. What have we got next? Okay, all right, let's do the story. So... The story is an interesting one for me, because I'm not much of a story guy, but I can try to give some give some takes on it. I think I actually did enjoy it. The story was interesting. I wanted to know what happened. It was definitely a lot more chill, a lot more laid back, no like crazy world-ending threat. And I think that's what players have been looking for, and it definitely is a change of pace, that's for sure. Again, I would say the big thing that's really noticeable about the story is the dialogue. My goodness, these NPCs do not stop talking. I think if I had to guess, I will actually crunch the numbers on this eventually, but I would say that the dialogue to actual gameplay, like the player doing something ratio, is probably like 80% dialogue, 20% gameplay. I think it actually might be less than that, by the way, but that's like a guesstimate of how much it is. So it is very, very talky, and that's not really my style, to be honest. I definitely like expressing the story through gameplay, like go and do that, right? We've got to go and do this. And I do like to be an active participant in the story, whereas this time it felt really passive. Like I was kind of watching the story happen rather than being a part of it. Most of the time, I was like a passenger there, and that's not something that I particularly enjoy. But I do think, again, this is very much intentional. They wanted to kind of take a bit of a backseat, slow it down a little bit, make it more about just kind of, let's just breathe. Let's have a relaxing break before we do anything apocalyptic in the upcoming future. I will say a couple of things, kind of like, I guess, mechanically about the story. I do really like that they made a lot of effort to make the story make sense, even if you haven't played the game, right? And this is kind of a good thing and a bad thing. Like, the story takes a while to get going, right? Like nothing really happens for a good chunk of time because a lot of it is trying to set up the world. It's trying to set up all the characters. So that even if you haven't played the game or you haven't played the game for a long time, it's going to kind of get you up to speed with what's going on. And then it starts leading into this kind of Titan story that you kind of uncover, like what's going on. You uncover this mystery. I think there are some really cool cinematic set pieces, by the way, in this regard. Like the first time you kind of really encounter the big Titan, when you encounter Greer the Blightbringer in Lowland Shore. There's a fantastic cutscene, and the cutscenes overall are really good. You just see this Titan looming over you, kind of emerging out of the fog, right? It's really cool, very, very, very enjoyable set piece overall. And as usual, the voice acting is absolutely killer. I love Greer's voice acting. It's really good, very, very menacing, and I'm sure we haven't heard the last of him, that's for sure. And actually, you know what? I have to... Okay. All right. We're doing this. The communicator, I hate it so much. This is actually one of the biggest complaints. I've had this complaint for a while now, but in Janthir Wilds, I've had enough. I'm done. I have got trolled so many times just flying over, enjoying the music. Just like, oh, wow, the music. Oh, because the music in the expansion, by the way, is insanely good. It is absolutely awesome. Love to hear the return of Brian Atkinson, who did a lot of that kind of heavier stuff from Soto, and that is really present in the expansion. The music is insane. One of the best soundtracks in all of Guild Wars 2, actually. In fact, it's probably competing for my top spot with Soto, I think, actually, with how good it really is. It sounds fantastic, and it really contributes to the theme of the world. Some really energetic themes, some more ambient stuff. And look, I've got to cut myself off rambling about the music real quick, because we have got to talk about the fact that I want to listen to that, and then all of a sudden, I hear this buzz, and an NPC is yapping at me. It is horrible. Like, and the thing that really set me off and got me mad was I wanted, when you defeat the Titans in Janthir Century, they kind of flame you a little bit. They kind of trash talk you a bit before they run away, right? And they have some really cool lines, right? Like Greer's like, oh yeah, this encounter was marked by my shame. Our next encounter will be marked with your blood, right? I'm like, yo, I want to listen to this. And then I hear Barbed Veil on the communicator, the audio literally playing at the same time, by the way. The Barbed Veil audio saying like, oh, good job, we won, guys, is playing at the same time as this. It's like, this has got to go. I hate it. It's annoying. It completely breaks my immersion. It's like, come on. What is going on here? I do not like this. I don't know. Maybe I'm just complaining. Maybe I'm just an old man yelling at the sky. But for me, the like audio overload of NPCs yelling at me when I just want to kind of sit down and kind of get immersed in the world, I just get completely taken out of it. I have to open the menu and mute it, right? This has got to go. You need to be able to turn the communicator off, or they need to come up with a new story device for how NPCs are going to contact you and how they're going to talk to you, because it is really, really annoying. There also needs to be a setting for muting all non-story dialogue, because Guild Wars 2 does this really well. Like, there's loads of cool, interesting, like ambient dialogue from all of the, just random NPCs, right? Like listening to them is really cool. And, I like that it's there. But here's the thing. It will play while I'm talking to a story NPC, right? Or while I'm trying to listen to a story conversation. And it's just so noisy, right? Like it's too much. Like I can't listen to both of the conversations at the same time. And that's something that I would actually really like to see addressed. It is just super overloady, super intense, and just actually really uncomfortable. There were a couple of times during the story where I was like, man, this is kind of rough, right? To listen to all of this at the same time. So I actually do really hope that gets addressed, but that's kind of like a bit of a side rant there, as it were, in that regard when it comes to the story. Like overall, I would say the story was good. It was enjoyable, a little bit too yappy for me, but again, it is the story, so it is what it is. I do definitely prefer a more active kind of, show rather than tell storyline, but as I understand it, people like that kind of thing, and it is what it is. That's how the story goes. That's fine. I guess my only other criticism will be is that I almost feel like we get faked out a little bit. We hadn't kind of had this like final confrontation with both of the Titans at the same time. And then we basically back out at the last second. The commander is definitely a bit of a coward, I feel like, in the story this time around. And we kind of have a bit of a fake out. And then we go like, oh no, they're on 5% HP. We can't finish the job. Oh, what are we going to do? And we basically run away. And Giz of Gold's team, they want this story to kind of continue into the future patches. And that's kind of it's a very different approach to SOTO, where they wanted to have like two distinct stories, like the Serra story and the Epoch story. And this is kind of like the trade-off we have here, is that they don't want to make the same mistake as SOTO is trying to set up additional villains in the follow-up updates. It looks like it is probably going to be the same characters, or at least over the next, at least in the next update. Maybe we'll see what happens after that. But I think we're going to be seeing these characters pop up again. They kind of tease this third Titan at the end there. And then the story just kind of ends. It's pretty abrupt, to be honest. It's like, oh, yep, that's it. Come back in 3 months. And I think that what's going on here actually is that and this kind of goes back to what I was talking about like the combat replayable stuff. I think ArenaNet is really thinking about what does the expansion look like in a year from now. Like they're really imagining like, okay, our goal here is to make a complete package that feels really good, as opposed to SOTO that started strong and then completely fizzled. They want it all to go together. So if you were a player who bought it, let's say a year from now, like down the line, and you're kind of playing through it, you'd have a really consistent, cohesive experience, which is obviously where SOTO really fell over, was those follow-up patches. I think that's what they're going for here. Because if I think about some of the things that I am not super happy about when it comes to Janthir Wilds, a lot of those things won't be a thing at the end of the expansion cycle. And I do think that it is worth criticizing this, right? It is worth criticizing, like, oh yeah, it would be nice if there was some combat-oriented gameplay on launch. That would be really, really cool. But also, this is kind of a feature of the system. This is like the trade-off that we're making here. Like, we're trading big content droughts where there's nothing going on, which is kind of how Guild Wars 2 has usually been. And we're trading that for, well, you don't have everything on launch, right? As you might have done with, say, Heart of Thorns or Path of Fire, both of which kind of very quickly released, like, they had those big meta events. Then they released raids very shortly after. And of course, like the Living World stuff at the same time. So that's kind of just an interesting meme. I've kind of got ahead of myself. I wanted to talk about content pacing last, actually. So we'll kind of go back to the story. I'll re-rail here. Like, I even derail while I'm not on stream, guys. That's something, right? Okay, so back to the story. Overall, I'd say it was pretty good. I think people are liking it. I liked it. The bears are very wholesome. I also do like that there's a bit of humor in it as well. There's kind of like some sarcastic, kind of sassy characters in there. Some big reveals. We're searching for a wizard bear. Isgarin is always really funny. I kind of wish Isgarin was more present in the story, actually. He's very entertaining, I think. Love the kind of mercurial nature of the semi-lunatic there as well. But anyway, story pretty good, I would say. Well written, decently executed. Bears. There you go. Boom. Okay, let's talk about the features next. And we're going to be talking about kind of like Homesteads and the Warclaw. These are the two features that we haven't talked about. The other one was Spears. Homesteads, I mean, it's a very good system. Let's not mess around it. It is very, very, very good. It's best in industry right now, in my opinion, when it comes to design. I've already seen some people create some really cool stuff, actually, like making kind of like replicas of like the Wizard's Tower and all this kind of stuff. And kind of like recreating a lot of these areas within the game and making some really fun stuff. It is very, very good. It's also pretty expensive as well, so get ready to grind or swipe. It's going to be pretty big there. Interesting meme. That is for sure, but the system as a whole is really, really good. And what I think it does do really well, and why I hope they really continue this into future expansions and kind of expand the Homestead and continue to have it as a part of the reward structure, is because I think it really fixes one of Guild Wars 2's main issues, is that it's very difficult to reward players in a meaningful way after a certain point. Like once you've got your ascended gear, you know, your characters work and you've got a bit of gold, you know, you got the quality of life, you know, you got all the stuff you need, you're comfortable playing the game. Everything doesn't matter anymore. Like no reward has any value to. Like who cares about gold? Who cares about like, oh, another ascended chest. Thank you. Wow, this is exciting, right? You know, you have the odd moment, maybe you drop an infusion, right? Maybe you drop like a rare item, like a precursor. Something like that. There are like occasional moments of like, oh yeah, let's go. But it does kind of get a little bit mushy, and I think this is what Homestead solved, because it has that physical quality to it, right? It has that, yeah, like this is an actual thing. Look, I can put it in my house, and look, I've dropped it and I can put it there. I can make a chair. I can make a bed. I can make, a table made out of chairs, right? I can stack all the chairs I want all over the place. Yeah, that's really cool, I think, actually. And it is a well-done system that I think will really add a lot of meaning and tangibility to a lot of the rewards in the game that I think Arena has struggled with for a very, very, very long time indeed. And they can continue to do this. They can add it to even old content. Eventually, they could use it to revitalize. They could help out PvP. They could help out World versus World, right? They could help out raids, of course, right? Like to really get people engaged with these systems and get them engaged through these game modes because of this really cool progression, kind of completionist simulator. And that's exactly what Homesteads are. Overall, all the tools are great. I would say that actually, I did see this criticism, and you know what? This is an interesting one. I think it's actually kind of fair. It would almost be nice if you could actually fully clean slate it. So in other words, like delete all of like the prefabricated stuff in the Homestead and have like a completely clean slate, because there are a couple of things that you can't change. Some of the main structures you obviously can't get rid of, and it would be kind of interesting if you could just say, you know what, I don't want any of that. I'm going to go do entirely my own thing. But to be fair, there's so much empty space. It's a big old map, right? You definitely have the ability to kind of easily do that as well. Just pretend the house doesn't exist, right? Just pretend it doesn't exist, guys. No problem. It's all good in that regard. So yeah, Homesteads have my seal of approval. It's not a system that I'm super about, but I will say I am really looking forward to seeing what people are capable of creating, right? Like what they're gonna make, and I'll be a spectator on this one. I'm not gonna be a participator. I'll be a spectator. That's my role in this, I think. Okay, Warclaw. So the Warclaw, it's all right. Okay, it's okay. They had to do something. It's kind of fun to use. You can kind of bounce around all over the place. I don't really have any particularly strong feelings about it. I do like they made it a lot faster. It's pretty fun to use, I think, getting a good bounce, and it suits the maps pretty well. When it comes to kind of traversing, I do still find myself like using the Sky Scale to climb up things, and the Griffin to fly really fast, and the Roller Beetle to go over long bits of terrain. But, I do find myself, it's something to jump off, boom. I'll jump off, and I'll bounce with the Warclaw, and that's kind of fun. I do want to kind of highlight the way they handled mounted combat this game this time actually, and I will actually say they did a really good job. I thought it was a complete disaster every time they've tried to do this, and I mentioned this in the Soto review, but how bad mounted combat was in Guild Wars 2, it made me genuinely think it's impossible to make it fun until I played WoW Dragonflight, where they did a really good job of it in some of their encounters, particularly like the raid encounter in the last raid of the expansion, Tindril Sageswift. And I thought, yeah, it's over. I can't believe this. This is going to be horrible. I'm going to hate every second. It was like, oh yeah, it's actually really fun. And yeah, I have to say, ArenaNet did a good job actually with the mounted combat here. Because they focus on movement, right? There's a really cool part of the Titan world bosses where you have to like latch onto it with the chain and then run around them and then pull them over like the Star Wars stuff, right? That's really cool. And on the Bog Queen, you have to squish maggots to prevent the Bog Queen from charging up and then obliterating you with all of the necromantic energy. Yeah, it's actually really cool. It looks fun because everyone's kind of running around, right? Like you can see all the ropes like pulling over these Titans, right? And you're ripping their armor off, like using the Warclaw. It's actually really, really cool. I'm very interested to see if they try to take that into the Convergence, try to take that into the raid. But this is the standard. This is how the Arena. This is how it should be. Don't make me press 1. Don't make me press 2. Let's have a little jumping puzzle with the mount. Let's, run around. Maybe we turn into a fish, okay? And that's the mount mechanic as well, And then, yeah, that's good. That is good overall. So those are my thoughts on the Warclaw. And I guess to kind of wrap things up and a bit of a meta conversation about this, I wanted to talk about content pacing a little bit and how this has been released. So as you've heard throughout this, the only thing like that I'm not super happy about with Janthir Wilds is that I don't feel that, for me, it has a lot of that replayability or kind of like a big thing to go for. I was done with the expansion in about 24 hours of gameplay. And hey, don't get me wrong, that's a decent amount. I'm not complaining about that. We got that done. But this is an MMO. I'm kind of expecting it to give me a big thing to go after, or either a big thing that I can do with a group, right? And I can go after, we can like work together and we can optimize it, we can min-max it. Like that's the kind of thing that I'm looking for. And Janthir Wilds doesn't have that. The world boss doesn't do that. I'll just say that now. It is fun. I enjoy it. I'm doing it, all the time. Like hearts don't do that. The world boss is not challenging, to be frank, and that's fine. I'm not really expecting it to, after the Dragon's End debacle, we're not going there, but it is what it is. So when I talk about content pacing, is that I feel completely differently about this expansion if the Legendary Spear was on launch or if the Convergence was on launch, because all of a sudden I have got that replayable group activity that I can play with my friends, right? And we can kind of get in there and like really sink our teeth into it and blast it down, right? Like that would be huge for me. And I do think this is a weird thing about Janthir Wilds. All of the combat content, basically, like combat-oriented content, is backloaded. We have the next patch with the raid normal mode and the Convergence normal mode. Then after that, it's going to be the legendary mode for the raid. And then finally, it's going to be the Convergence challenge mode and the Fractal with its challenge mode. Now, that's actually really cool. If we look at the feature set of this expansion from a combat perspective, it's actually really good. We're eating good, guys. We got 1 legendary mode in Soto. We're getting 3 in Janthir Wilds. We're getting that Fractal again. Ooh, hope that's good. And then we also have the Convergence CM, which again, I'm actually really excited for the Convergence CM. I'm glad it doesn't overlap with the raid CMs actually, because of course I want to go for that one too, really hard on launch. And that is the only thing that I find weird. Right? Like there's nothing big to go after or big to kind of figure out and learn on launch. And that's an experience that I really personally enjoy. And that isn't here this time around, which is a little bit unfortunate in my opinion. To be honest. So I'd love to see some of that, something like that on launch, right? Like something like that, like the spear, so we could figure out the collection, right? Or the Convergence, we could figure out how to do that. And kind of on the spear as well, okay, I am going to complain about this. I know this is a bit of a, suffering from success, like first world problems meme, but I really don't like that I can pre-grind the spear because I'm going to keep playing the game. Obviously, I'm going to be gathering these rune stones. I'm going to be gathering up all the materials. ArenaNet already told us that we need essences, so I'm going to have all of those. They accidentally leaked the collection in-game, but with a UI bug, so that's also pretty funny. So we know what's involved there, presumably for the spear. We don't know for sure, but presumably for the spear, which is coming in the next patch. And what this means is that unless there's some kind of like big time gate or like really heavy grind, which I kind of hope there is, honestly, for the spear that's kind of related to the convergence or the raid, realistically, I'm going to have all of this stuff on day one when it releases, and I'm not a big fan of pre-grinding. I felt the same way about the legendary sigil and the legendary armor. I think it's not the same, like going like, oh yeah, I'm going to grind all the materials now. Well, you're grinding for nothing, right? It's not the same as having that launch experience where everyone's got to go figure it out, right? Like it's a new uncharted mystery that we've got to solve on like, how do we get this legendary weapon? Like, how do we figure that out? And maybe they can still capture that with a collection. I really hope they do have a Gen 2 style collection where you've got to do a lot of different activities and explore and like check out all these like crazy events and like, you know, investigate the side stories. But I would like to see something like that exist on launch, and I'm not a big fan of the pre-grinding. We need to not allow pre-grinding, guys, okay? This is an illegal move. In this regard, when it comes to that, with the content pacing as well. But yeah, I think I've kind of got the point across there. I definitely think that the expansion could really use a bit more front loading there, and that might not be possible. You know, I'm just kind of, I'm giving my opinion here. I'm not really expecting this to change, really. I'm not sure how feasible that really is, given the, you know, ArenaNet's development schedule. They're really cranking, right? Like, bear in mind, the end of the expansion, the final patch, 3 months later, we're going into another expansion. So it might simply be impossible, but it's just something that I kind of want to put out there and kind of have a discussion about, because I do think content pacing is really important. And I also want to say that I love MMORPG launches, right? When an expansion launches, there is that hype, you know, there is that excitement, right? I want to have a big launch to really go hard on and grind out over the next couple of weeks, right? It's fun, especially when there's a lot of things to discover as a community. Having that meta element is really important to me. I really enjoy that, whether it's figuring out a raid boss or figuring out a collection or finding an event, right? Or like figuring out how to do all the technology to do Salmon Rush Gold, right? All these things are really special. And I think that is unique to the launch as well. This is why like something new and it drops and you've got to go find it is not the same as, well, you kind of know ahead of time and you can just prepare for it, right? Like those two experiences to me are incredibly different in that regard. So yeah, I think that actually kind of wraps up most of the things that I wanted to say about Janthir Wilds. Bit of a podcast here, to be honest. Actually, we've been yapping a little bit. Okay, we love to see that. But anyway, overall, I would say that Janthir Wilds, very good experience. Definitely worth checking out. Definitely worth getting into the mix using my referral link. Yeah, that's right. You better believe it. But anyway, you get the idea. I do think it's a really, really strong expansion. And I've said this a couple of times, and I will 100% double down on this. I am expecting, I'm going to do a tier list of Guild Wars 2 expansions pretty soon. Spoiler alert, it's Heart of Thorns, End of Dragons, Path of Fire, and Soto. There you go. But I'll obviously reason that more out in the tier list. I would pencil in Janthir Wilds to be End of Dragons tier in all ways. Like, yeah, elite specs don't exist anymore, but you know what? I can kind of get past that. I'm more of a content guy. Like, as long as the content is good and the content's really solid, like, yeah, I can live without that. And I know some people might feel differently, but hey, this is my channel. I get to give the opinions here. So yeah, I really am expecting some pretty good things here, actually. Like, ArenaNet has clearly learned, they've clearly iterated, and they're also doing what they do best, right? Like, it's a very focused expansion, trying to focus on the strengths of Guild Wars 2, right? And trying to find areas where its weaknesses can be addressed, right? Like with this focus on instanced challenge rather than making the open world kind of combat-oriented. All that kind of stuff. So I think there's some really solid development strategy here. And hell, we don't even know about the PvP mode yet, right? Like, that is coming up pretty soon. So we've got to even stay tuned. We have no idea. We don't know what's going on there. But overall, those are my thoughts on Janthir Wilds. I hope you enjoyed them, gamers. Thank you very much for watching or listening to this little meme video. I'm very curious to hear what everyone else thinks. So, leave your comments down below. That's going to do it for now. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned, of course, for the full comprehensive review, hopefully coming up pretty damn soon, actually. Like, comment, subscribe. Tell me if the button's glowing, by the way. It's supposed to glow, guys, when you say subscribe on YouTube. It's newfangled stuff. It really is. And, of course, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.